Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session entitled Beyond 9 to 5, Promoting Financial Security and Stability for Survivors. My name is Linda Seabrook, and I'm General Counsel and Director of Workplace Safety and Equity for Futures Without Violence. And I'm joined here today by my distinguished colleagues of experts, survivors, and advocates, Kaisha Preston, M. Jackson from Free From, and Deborah Vagins from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. And also joining us, you can't see her, she's the magic behind the mirror, is Kate Kite, also from NNEDV. And we thank Kate for her help today. Before we get started, we wanted to take a moment to send our love and support to those of you who are viewing this from the West Coast. We hope by the time that you see this, your air has cleared and your landscape has healed. So what we're going to talk about today is financial security and stability for survivors. So as a result of this session today, you'll be better able to identify financial abuse, recognize the ways that financial abuse impacts your financial, emotional, and career stability, discuss workplace and policy solutions for addressing financial abuse, develop strategies for individual, collective, and workplace advocacy, and navigate and engage tools and resources to promote financial resiliency, recovery, literacy, and independence. And before I turn it over to Deb, who'll be speaking with us first, I think it's a good idea to kind of get us all in the same kind of headspace about what we're going to be talking about today, so we can come with a shared understanding. So I'd like everyone to take a minute, a few seconds, to think about how experiences with domestic violence, sexual assault, or sexual harassment may have impacted your ability to go to work, to concentrate at work, to feel financially secure, or keep your job. And as we take a couple of moments and think about that, feel free to share in the chat, and then I'm going to invite Deb to start us off.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you all of you who are joining us today. I'm Deborah Vagins. I'm the CEO and president of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and we're an organization dedicated to creating a social, political, and economic environment in which domestic violence no longer exists. I'm so pleased to be joining Survivor Summit and this great panel today to discuss promoting financial security and stability for survivors, especially at this impossibly difficult time. So I want to start by just discussing some background on financial abuse and help us set the stage. According to the CDC, more than 1 in 3 women in the United States have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Survivors of domestic violence make tough choices every day. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was challenging for survivors to find housing, get help from the courts, and stay safe. Now, when survivors are forced to stay in their homes or in close proximity to their abuser more frequently, an abuser can use any tool to exert control over the survivor, including a national health crisis like COVID-19. The majority of survivors of domestic violence experience financial abuse, which is exacerbated during an economic downturn because survivors may lose their jobs or be unable to find work. And if a survivor has lost her job and money to pay rent, with minimal access to paid time off or lack of unemployment insurance, survivors can be dependent on an abusive partner for housing and support. When you are in the position to leave your abuser, you are often met with the real awareness that you cannot financially afford to stay safe. So whether by intentional sabotage of economic opportunities, credit and financial solvency by abusers, or inflexible workplaces or inadequate remedies, a path to achieving financial security and stability is essential for all survivors. So in the few minutes I have with you, I'm going to give you an overview of financial abuse and then discuss 3 of the initiatives we're working on at NNEDV to try and help. And my colleagues will be talking about all of the amazing work that they are doing as well. So financial abuse is a common tactic used by abusers to gain power and control in a relationship. It can keep survivors trapped in an abusive relationship, as we've talked about, because their financial choices are fewer, and deeply diminishes the survivor's ability to leave and stay safe after leaving an abusive partner. Research actually indicates that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. So there are some common methods and examples, and these are by no means all of them. But financial abuse can look like sabotaging work or employment opportunities by harassing the survivor at the workplace, causing the survivor to lose his or her job by physically battering them prior to important meetings or interviews, forbidding the survivor from attending job training or advancement, cutting up work clothes, running up large amount of debts on joint accounts, or refusing to pay bills and ruining the survivor's credit score. So leaving an abusive relationship can leave a survivor in an impossibly difficult financial situation and has long-lasting effects, which can lead to longer-term problems, loss of job, ruined credit, being evicted or losing housing opportunities, or having success in current and future jobs or in education be sabotaged. So that is what leads to our work. NNEDV's Economic Justice Project was founded to respond to and address and prevent financial abuse. And as I mentioned, I'll talk about three components of the work we do. First, we work with advocates. We strengthen survivor advocates' financial skills so that they can better assist survivors of domestic violence, moving from short-term safety to long-term security. So using the Moving Ahead curriculum in partnership with the Allstate Foundation, we employ a train-the-trainer approach to deliver financial literacy lessons to survivor advocates across the United States through our network of state and territorial domestic violence coalitions and their local member programs. So this curriculum has 5 modules, which you can also access online, and it covers basics about understanding financial abuse, learning financial fundamentals, mastering credit basics, building financial foundations, and creating budget strategies. So we're looking at safety planning, budgeting, credit, loans, and long-term planning. Second, under our Independence Project, we work directly with survivors of domestic violence in rebuilding credit scores that have been damaged as a result of financial abuse. So that's credit building and credit repair with survivors through microlending. So in this project, a survivor can apply for a credit building microloan of $100 to repay the loan over the subsequent 10 months with no interest. And so the goal is that this can help, through these payments that are made each month, this can help survivors rebuild their credit rating, or if they were credit invisible because an abuser wouldn't allow them access to credit at all, it allows them to become credit visible. We track the payments made by the survivors, and then we undertake the necessary reporting to the 3 credit bureaus. We're lending in every state. And since we launched the project in 2017, more than 384 borrowers have successfully completed their microloan payments. And on average, borrowers have credit scores of 638 upon completion, or have increased their credit score by 25 points. And those who have entered the project as credit invisible complete the program with an average score of 337. You can look at our website for more information and requirements on how to apply yourself. So we work with advocates and we work with survivors on financial empowerment, but we also know that we need policy changes, and that is the 3rd major prong of our work. Personal safety and economic security are inextricably linked for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and we need policy solutions. So we work with Congress, with many of the other groups participating in this summit, to support policy changes to provide stable economic supports for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Employees who are survivors may need workplace and economic supports to help them stay safe. And I know you'll be hearing more about that as well from Linda. But as far as legislation, we need more paid sick and safe day legislation. We need federal laws which would permit survivors to take time off work to address the health consequences of violence or to attend to other critical safety needs without compromising their jobs. We need non-discrimination legislation, which would prevent employers from firing employees because of their status as a survivor of domestic violence. We've got to expand access to unemployment insurance, which can significantly assist survivors in sustaining economic stability if they lose their jobs because of domestic violence. A lot of states, the majority of states have some protections, but federal legislation is needed so that we have nationwide protections. And survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault who are predominantly women would benefit from equal pay and increased minimum wage and living wage laws. As long as women, and predominantly women of color, make less than men for performing the same or similar work, survivors' ability to gain financial stability and independence is hampered. And of course, if COVID has taught us anything, we must have access to affordable, quality childcare, robust healthcare, and access to social safety nets like TANF and SNAP and SSDI. Finally, just wrapping up on the policy section, I will say that the pandemic and the nation's response to it has further exposed the already existing inequities in our culture in access to healthcare and healthcare outcomes, in employment and economic supports, and more. We know that sheltering in place is not a viable option for frontline and essential workers, many of whom are women, particularly women of color, already facing the disproportionate impacts of historical trauma and discrimination and violence, while now facing increased exposure to the virus. And simultaneously, the historic loss of economic opportunity in this country has been especially acute for women and workers of color who already hold the majority of low-paid work and suffer from pay inequality and do not have access to paid sick leave and other health benefits. So the pandemic has really shone a bright light on the lack of support and the myriad other racial and gender disparities that have persisted for far too long. So as this pandemic continues, we have to continue to urge Congress to address the disparate impact that it continues to have on workers of color and women and survivors, so that we're creating policy solutions that explicitly center these communities. And you can join us by taking action on our website. So let me just end by saying that abusive partners work very hard to keep survivors trapped in the relationship. But I want the people watching today to know that you are not alone. Despite the challenges during the pandemic, help is available. You can contact your National Domestic Violence Hotline 24/7. You can use chat and text to reach them. And your local domestic violence programs are also there for you and offering more and more digital and virtual services if you need them. And NNEDV has a lot of resources as well at nnedv.org. You can look up our information on financial abuse and economic empowerment, and you can look at our policy pages. So please check it out. So thank you very much. And let me turn it over to Kaisha Preston to tell her inspiring story.
Thank you. My name's Kaisha Preston. I'm a domestic violence survivor, and I spent over a decade in a relationship where I was unsure if what was happening to me was abuse. I was pushed, shoved, I had large, heavy objects thrown at me. I was torn down verbally and threatened with physical harm. I was once put out of a vehicle and left on the side of the road at 3 a.m. because he had been drinking and I suggested that I should drive. But he had never actually hit me, and I was reminded of that anytime I referred to his behavior as abuse. I was gaslighted into thinking that I was crazy and dramatic, and regularly found myself questioning my own reality. The time that I spent in that marriage took a toll on me mentally and emotionally, but it also left a significant mark financially. I got married incredibly young and put college on hold to support my then husband's career. But when I finally decided that I wanted to go back to school, those efforts were sabotaged. I was a mother working a full-time job, attending college as a full-time student, and when I came home, I was also expected to be responsible for all of the household chores, the cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing fell 100% on me. And if I asked for help, the response was always, "I didn't ask you to go back to school." My husband was resentful of me trying to complete my education and mentioned on more than one occasion that he felt I was positioning myself to someday out-earn him and leave. I now realize this was a huge red flag for what the rest of that marriage would become. But instead of heeding that warning and getting out, I stayed. Eventually, my workload escalated to the point that I couldn't juggle work, home, and school. And since we made more than enough to comfortably exist as a single income home, I made the decision to quit my job and focus exclusively on school. Quitting my job made it easier to give my education the attention that it deserved, but it also set the stage to become a victim of economic abuse. Once I no longer had money of my own, it became a tool through which my ex-husband tried to control me. If I made him mad, he'd withdraw money, placing it into accounts that only he had access to, forcing me to beg or fall in line to accommodate my basic needs. Whenever I did manage to generate an income stream of my own, he engaged in reckless spending patterns, forcing me to use my income to clean up his financial messes. And things finally came to a breaking point in March of 2016. We were separated and he was no longer living at home, but he was still monitoring my whereabouts and attempting to control me from afar. His behavior had become increasingly unsettling, and I was becoming afraid of him in a way that I had not been before. We had a verbal altercation when he showed up that day to visit with our kids, and when he left with the threat that our fight was far from done. Knowing that he owned a gun and afraid of what he might do if he returned, I decided to change the locks on our home for safety that night. When he saw via the home security app that the doors to the home were open, he came back, parked down the block where he couldn't be seen, and hid in our bushes to spy on me. And when he realized I was changing the locks, he came out of hiding and tried to force his way inside. He grabbed me forcefully enough to leave bruises on my arms and refused to let go until I fought back. I called the police, who showed up and asked me what I had done to provoke his behavior, followed by telling me that since technically he also owned the home, there was nothing they could do to make him leave. To keep him from returning, I got a protective order and pressed charges to put his behavior on record. And when he was no longer able to subject me to any physical or verbal abuse, he drained our joint bank accounts completely, refused to pay court-ordered child or spousal support, and I was left with 3 kids, $0, and no job. The next few months were filled with going back and forth to court, fighting unsuccessfully for child and spousal support to be enforced. I had also pressed charges against him for assault, and he countered because I fought back. We were both found guilty of assault and battery, though what I had actually done was self-defense, and it took months of fighting with an appeal to finally have my name cleared. The constant back and forth to court impacted my ability to successfully work, and my economic status further deteriorated. I began skipping bills and maxing out credit cards to survive. My credit was destroyed, and when my home eventually went into foreclosure, despite the fact that I'd found a good paying job and was more than capable of paying my bills, no one would rent to me because of my credit history, and I found myself facing homelessness with my kids. I spent nearly half a year applying for housing like it was my full-time job and consistently getting turned away. And 2 weeks before my children and I would have been out on the streets, I finally found a private landlord who didn't run credit checks at all. The house was in a less than desirable part of town, and it was basically falling apart, but it was the roof over our heads, and I was more than happy to take what I could get. After finding housing, connecting with mental health services, and finally wrapping up my battles in court, my life began to drastically improve. And in 2019, I decided to take my power back the best way I knew how, by taking something bad that happened to me and using it to fight for others. That year, I worked with my state delegate and wrote the Virginia Domestic Violence Victims Protection Act, which was signed into law by Governor Ralph Northam on March 23rd of this year. This law helps victims of financial abuse avoid the housing challenges that I faced by removing the barriers that I encountered as a result of credit check requirements. I've since been invited to the U.S. House of Representatives for a congressional briefing on violence against women. I now serve on an advisory committee for local domestic violence services. And the one piece of wisdom from my experience that I would like to leave with everyone with is that domestic violence affects people in a number of different ways, and that the economic impacts are just as serious as physical forms of abuse. Thank you all for being here today, and now I'm going to turn it over to M. Jackson.
Thank you so much, Kaisha. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here and to also be a part of this panel. My name is M. Jackson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Director of Peer Engagement and Support at the nonprofit Free From. where we work with and on behalf of survivors of intimate partner violence to create pathways to economic security and long-term safety. Today, I will be talking to you all about our survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support groups. At Freefrom, we envision a world where survivors have sustaining income, savings, and credit with which to build wealth and the resources to support individual, intergenerational, and community healing. To that end, we're taking a holistic approach that uses technology, peer-to-peer networks, training programs for shelters, policy advocacy, social enterprise models, as well as cross-sector solutions. And what we look to do with our approach is to really create an ecosystem of support for survivors. Within that ecosystem of support, something that we have created and launched earlier this year is our survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support groups. And with launching those groups and creating those, what we kept in mind was that the number one reason folks stay in or return to abusive situations is because of the lack of economic security. And so we wanted to find a way where survivors could come together to build financial security, community power, reduce isolation, and receive and share resources in a peer-to-peer setting of 2 to 8 survivors. We wanted those groups to focus on encouraging healing as well as overall well-being. Originally, the groups were meant to be held in person. However, because of COVID, we were able to transition and provide virtual meeting spaces for each group. What that did was that it also allowed us to respond to the further isolation of COVID, as well as the financial insecurity that many survivors of intimate partner violence experience. We're really excited about the peer-to-peer model specifically for survivors, because what it is survivors being able to come together and not having to explain to each other why their credit is the way that it is, or why they have certain triggers or financial trauma. Because the group is made up of other survivors, they just get it. The empathy is already there. So with keeping that in mind, it's very simple for anyone that's interested, any survivor of any type of violence, to be able to start or join a survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support group. What the survivor would have to do is to find 2 to 8 other survivors within their community, or it can be survivors that are in different states. And if they don't know of other survivors, all they would have to do when they contact me and show their interest is to say that they would like to join a group. So once I have that interest, and once I know as well where that survivor is located, I will ask if they are creating their own group, how many will be participating. And then we send out the welcome materials for each group member. So we mail that out to them, and in the welcome materials, what's included is a starter pack. So what the starter pack is it's materials that support their healing and financial freedom. What's included is a guidebook with over 200 pages of optional group discussions, activities, and resources. And when we created that guidebook at Freefrom, what we wanted to do is we wanted to keep in mind the diversity of survivors that would be participating and the diversity in their healing journeys. And we also wanted to make sure that what this guidebook did was it was just another tool that survivors could add to their tool belt, and that it would help to navigate conversations within the groups, but that they also had autonomy over the groups. We love that this peer-to-peer model is innovative in its structure, approach, and flexibility. For us, it's all about trusting survivors to navigate their healing and providing support. We reach out to all survivors, regardless if they stay in a situation that is abusive or if they're at the point where they have left. We want to make sure that they all have access to financial security, freedom, as well as community support. And with our hands-off approach, what that really means is that we see the survivors that are participating in the group as sitting in the driver's seat, and us as staff and us at Freefrom as sitting in the back seat and just there to offer support. The groups are available nationwide. And what's great about that as well is that, again, survivors are able to create these groups within their own communities. So if they are in a rural area that doesn't have a lot of resources or doesn't have a lot of access, and they can create a group very easily. Or perhaps they're part of the LGBTQIA+ community and they want to be around other folks that they feel would affirm their identity, then they can create a community with others that identifies LGBTQIA+ as well. And so we're very excited about how these groups can expand and where they will go. So thinking about expansion, what we're doing is also collecting research and data about the groups. And we collect the research and data anonymously, and it is also on a volunteer basis. The research and data is collected through 3 surveys throughout the duration of the groups. And we use the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's financial well-being scale to measure the financial well-being of the group members from when they begin in the group, looking all the way until they have been further out and participating. We want to look at the feelings of financial freedom that they experience and the changes in that, as well as community support. What we'll also be doing is holding focus groups early next year to gain even more feedback and learn what changes we can make to the guidebook and make it even more inclusive and survivor friendly. And we also want to include financial well-being materials for the children of the survivors that are participating so that we can make sure that we are looking at the intergenerational aspect of it as well. Each group has a free from liaison. And what that liaison does is after each meeting, they speak on behalf of the group by answering a survey with questions that ask how the group was, when the next meeting date is, any challenges that they experience, any successes, as well as any support that they would be in need of. That way I'm able to look at the impact of the groups immediately and also provide that immediate support. The groups have grown tremendously already. We launched in March, and we already are onboarding our 15th group. Of the 15 groups, we have over 50 survivors that are represented in the groups, and they're representing 29 different cities. Most groups do meet once a month, some weekly and some bi-weekly. But again, that goes with the flexibility. It's up to the group to decide how often they're going to meet and how long they're going to meet. Again, we're just there to provide that support, but making sure that we always remind the survivors that we see them as their best resource, and also the community that is surrounding them as well. Within the group, there's a mix of survivors that have left their harm-doer, as well as some that are still with them. And that goes again with the community feel, where they know that within those groups, there's no judgment, and that people are at different levels of their healing journey. So if you are interested in creating a group and joining a group, I would love if you could contact me at em.jackson@freefrom.org. Again, my name is M. Jackson, and you can also continue to stay connected with Free From at our website, freefrom.org, which is spelled FREEFROM.org. I am really excited to be in community with you all and would love to provide any more information or answer any questions about our survivor-led peer-to-peer financial support groups. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Linda.
Hi again. My name is Linda Seabrook, and I'm General Counsel and Director of Workplace Safety and Equity for Futures Without Violence. Futures Without Violence is a national organization that works to end violence against women and children around the world and to help families heal and thrive. My team leads the nation's only national resource center that's solely dedicated to addressing the impacts of domestic violence, sexual violence and harassment, and stalking on workers in the workplace. We help employers, advocates, unions, and most importantly, employees create workplaces that promote greater safety, equity, support, and resilience, and also improve responses to workers experiencing abuse and harassment. So, Em just spoke about how you can advocate for yourself, but how can you also advocate with your employer on making better responses to survivors in the workplace? How can you urge your employer to do better? So a lot of ways you can do that is to make the case to your employer, right? Maybe you talk to them about the costs of violence and harassment, things such as healthcare costs that Deb spoke about, employee turnover, absenteeism, staff morale, because if violence is happening within the workplace, that certainly affects everyone, and productivity. You can also talk to your employer perhaps about aligning their mission and values, right? Many companies have a mission or value statement, and you can challenge them. Are they living up to it? Also, a workplace is made out of people. We bring our whole selves to work, and I think what we've seen in this time of the pandemic is a complete conflation of work and home, And I think that's becoming quite obvious to many employers. And at the Resource Center, we're actually hearing from many employers. You know, a workplace is made out of people, and we come to work as we are. So, you know, it behooves an employer, a workplace, to have that support there so that we don't have to worry about home at work, or if we are worrying about home at work, we can take care of that. Also, there's the thing called the 25% buy-in rule. You know, if your employer isn't listening and not being responsive, it only takes, research has shown, it only takes 25% of any group, whether that's a sports team or a workplace or a group of friends or association, to buy into making change. And so you can get your other coworkers who care. I mean, we work with people, we spend more time at work than we do sometimes at home. And these are people who care about us, right? These are often our friends. So if you can engage some of your friends to help create a better and more supportive workplace environment and safer workplace environment, then if you can even get just 25%, you can get there and do it yourself. And then it's also, you know, the realities of work. Employers are, like I said earlier, are just realizing what employees are experiencing. And so this is the time right now is a really important time where we can just maximize an employer's kind of understanding of how we bring our whole selves to work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some tools that we have on workplacesrespond.org to enhance and improve workplace culture and supportive workplace policies. So the goals of that is to institute trauma-informed, survivor-centered workplace policies. Educating employees on the dynamics of domestic violence and sexual assault and harassment, ensuring that all employees are aware of those workplace policies once developed and what supports are available, providing supervisors with resources and guidance to help individuals who disclose abusive relationships, those who are seeking support within the workplace, and then also conducting safety audits to prevent potential perpetrators' access to the workplace and to employees. Ideally, this is what you're trying to get your employer to commit to. So only 35% of companies in the United States have a workplace policy that addresses domestic violence. Most companies have workplace policies that kind of focus more, if you're talking about gender-based violence, on sexual harassment. But again, we bring our whole selves to work. So I think it's important to kind of tell your employer that, that addressing all forms of gender-based violence that any employee can experience is really important. It should be inclusive of all forms of gender-based violence and harassment. It should cover all employee relationships, contractors, vendors, and all locations where an individual can work. It should detail reporting and investigation processes and define consequences for those who violate the policy. And we have a model policy so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, as well as your employer wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, on our website at workplacesrespond.org. It's important, when we talk about how we kind of move into this space in the workplace, right? I think a lot of times when we think of a workplace, we think of the separate, right? It's the home and it's the work. But when we move into the workplace, it's really important to prioritize a survivor's wishes, a survivor's safety and well-being. because this empowers survivors who are workers, right, and provides them with options and information. It encourages collaboration. It promotes survivor safety and well-being. It ensures accountability for those who use violence. It demonstrates trustworthiness and transparency. And it also provides resources and referrals to local or national service providers, and allows, it also provides accommodations to allow survivors to receive that help on work time, or be able to change their schedule if necessary, or in more serious situations, perhaps change work locations or schedules or contact information. So only 20% of companies in the United States offer any type of training and education on gender-based violence and responding to that in the workplace. This is an area that if your employer is not on board with creating these workplace policies and training, that this is something you all can do yourselves. Again, going back to that 25% rule, if you can just get 25% of your workplace on board, you can drive change. You can build an educational program, and you don't have to do it by yourself. Again, we have model educational programs at workplacesrespond.org that you can find. But some things that you want to include in such an educational program are centered around issues of equity and respect and support. An educational program also allows you to kind of build a common dialogue and understanding of what survivors need in the workplace to succeed. It equips individuals with resources and knowledge and tools. Again, it provides those resources and referrals, and it also allows you to participate in an ongoing conversation. Any workplace education program shouldn't ever be a one-off. It should never be something where you just talk about it, for an hour once a year, and that often is kind of the case, right? But especially if you're building this with your colleagues together, this is something that you can do, on a lunch hour, after work, if possible, or any other time. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the workplace. Or you can find time, or at least maybe even advocate for your employer if they don't want to engage in this full-scale education program, but they can at least give you some time as a collective to do some training. So creating a safe and supportive workplace, even if you move from, I think when I've been talking a little bit more about the domestic violence situation. We can also talk today about sexual harassment and violence that may take place on the job, in the workplace. And again, this is a strategy that you don't have to have employer buy-in to do. You can create a bystander intervention strategy with your colleagues of prevention and intervention, where you, if you see something that is occurring that is an instance of violence, sexual harassment or violence, you can disrupt it by calling it out. You can confront, and by confront, I don't mean any type of like physical confrontation even. It can be as simple as, hey, I saw that, and that's not cool. That's not the way you should talk to Jane. And then you can also give support. As coworkers, we can give support to each other. Again, researching what local programs are available to help survivors of sexual harassment, sexual violence, or domestic violence. You can offer resources and support. You can create together a system of bystander intervention, support, healing, and safety. So again, you don't have to create any of these on your own. Please feel free to visit our website at www.workplacesrespond.org. And I just wanted to say, I'm closing us out, on behalf of all of us today, we wish you well. Please reach out if you need anything from us. And we thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.